Hi, it's Joan from Joan's Kitchen, and today we're doing something a little bit different. I'm going on video because this is a dish that really can't be prepared quickly, so I'm not doing it live today. Today I am making shrimp étouffé. This is a dish that comes from the Louisiana area, from New Orleans. It's typically made with crawfish, but crawfish are a little bit harder to get outside of Louisiana, so I'm doing it with shrimp instead. This is a recipe that I've adapted from the Plantation Cookbook, which is a cookbook published in 1967 as a fundraising publication for the Junior League of New Orleans. So I'm going to go over what the ingredients are and we're going to get cooking. This is a dish that can actually come together pretty quickly. It takes a little while to prepare. There's probably about an hour and a half of total cooking time, but none of the ingredients are very exotic. And I'm going to teach you a little trick that's really going to deepen the flavor of it. So in order to make this dish, we have a green pepper, we have a yellow onion, we have some celery. And by the way, those three ingredients in Louisiana cooking are called the Holy Trinity. They're the base for a lot of the sauces. And combined together, they just give a really nice flavor. This dish also has green onions cooked in with it. It also has a little bit of garlic. And then what you do is we're going to be melting some butter and mixing that with flour. And that's going to make a roux, which is actually what we're going to be sauteing the vegetables in. A roux is a combination of flour and some kind of oil. So the flour is basically browned in the oil. It adds coloring to the food that you're preparing. It adds flavor depending on how brown you let the flour get. And it also helps to thicken the final dish. This dish also has a touch of Worcester sauce. Of course, it has shrimp. That's the main ingredient. There's very little seasoning in it. It has a little bit of dried basil, dried thyme, and a bay leaf. And then it's going to have a little bit of tomato sauce in it. The recipe also calls for Tabasco sauce to taste. You may associate Cajun or Creole food with spicy food. Personally, I don't care for spicy food, so I don't add the Tabasco sauce to mine while I'm cooking it, but when I serve this, I do have it out on the table, so if somebody wants to add the Tabasco sauce to it, they can. You'll notice that I am using frozen shrimp. I prefer to use frozen shrimp rather than the shrimp that you would find like in the seafood counter at the supermarket, because these shrimp are frozen pretty much immediately after they're caught, and that way I'm much more sure that they are nice and fresh when I'm cooking something. These particular shrimp have the shell on, and that's deliberate because I'm going to be peeling them, and then I'm actually going to be making a little broth out of the shrimp shells, which is going to be the liquid that's going to go into my recipe. And having that shrimp stock or the shrimp broth from cooking the shrimp shells really deepens the flavor of the entire dish. If you don't have that or you don't want to do that, there's a number of things that you can substitute. You can use just plain water. You can use a combination of white wine and bottled clam juice and water, or you can use all clam juice. But as long as you've got the shrimp shells, why not go ahead and use them? And I was actually really heartened recently. I saw a bunch of recipes from the chef Andrew Zimmern, and he also recommended saving the shrimp shells and making a stock out of them and even freezing it to have for future use. So those are our ingredients. As you can see, my shrimp are still a little bit frozen. They still have ice crystals on them, but I'm going to be able to use them pretty quickly. I'm just going to be running some cool water over the shrimp to get them to kind of get rid of the ice crystals. So as I do this, you can see the ice crystals kind of melting off right away. And as soon as I'm doing this, this is cool water, by the way, I'm already being able to smell the aroma of the shrimp itself. These particular shrimp that I'm using are called easy peel shrimp because they've already been split down the back. So the peels are pretty much going to come right off. When you're working with shrimp, typically there's a black vein that goes down the back of the shrimp. And when you hear a reference to peeling and deveining, they're talking about taking off the shell of the shrimp and then cutting into the back to take that vein out. The vein has a lot of sand in it, or sometimes if it's a farm shrimp, it might be the remnants of whatever they had been fed, but it's really something that you don't want to have in your mouth. So you want to make sure that you cut that out before you cook and before you serve. Sometimes people will cook whole shrimp in the shell, and there's really not a way to get that vein out from the shrimp in the shell like that. If I'm eating shrimp in the shell, I typically pull it out before I eat the shrimp just because I find it unpleasant. And I'm going on here to peel the shrimp, and these really are easy peel. The peels are coming right off. I try to retain as much of the tail as I can by just kind of tugging it. So there's my peeled shrimp, and you can see I'm saving the shells here. When I get these all peeled and saved, I'm going to be putting the shells just in some water to cover with some peppercorns and a bay leaf, and just let that simmer for about 20 minutes. So I'll be back when I have all these peeled and I'm ready to do my shrimp stock. Well, I'm back. I've got my shrimp peeled, and this is the residue of the shells that's left over. It's just really like 2 small handfuls of shrimp shells. And I'm going to transfer that into a small saucepan and cover it with water and put in a couple peppercorns and a bay leaf just to give a little extra flavor. And I'm going to set that on to simmer. For the recipe that I'm making, I need about 2 cups of liquid. So I'm just going to put in a little bit more than 2 cups and let it simmer for about 15 or 20 minutes just to infuse the water with the flavor out of the shrimp shells. So basically we're using every last part of the shrimp. So we are back and we are getting ready to make the roux. You can see I have some butter in the pan that's going to be melting, and as soon as that's melted, I'm going to go ahead and whisk my flour in, and we will start getting that going. So I'm getting ready to add the flour now, and the recipe says to make it into a walnut colored roux. So again, the roux is basically flour that's cooked in oil, and I'm just going to go ahead and mix that in right now and start my whisking. You can see that the butter mixture is starting to bubble with the flour being added in there, and that's because of the flour cooking. There's a lot of different ways of doing a roux. A roux is pretty typical on making some kind of a gravy. My cooking teacher, Peggy Ryan, used to mention that the main thing is that you want to have the flour not have a raw taste to it anymore. But this one specifies that it should be a walnut color. So it wants it to be cooked a little bit more, so it's a little bit darker. Cooking in New Orleans has a lot of different influences. There's a lot of French terms because the French had the Louisiana Territory before the U.S. purchased it from them. And roux is a French word, as is étouffé, which is the name of the dish. Étouffé basically means smothered. And you'll see as we go along that the shrimp are in effect smothered in this really rich, tasty sauce. I'm going to keep letting this bubble here for a few minutes before I come back on again. We are back, and our roux has achieved what I would call the walnut color. You can see when I stir it, there's kind of like a darker brown underneath. So that's meaning that the flour has browned in the butter. And I've gone ahead and chopped up the vegetables. The vegetables are pretty much in a rough chop. And you don't have to be really precise about this because they're actually going to be cooking in here for about half an hour. And they're going to be kind of almost melting into the sauce. And, you know, once again, I wish that we had smell-o-vision because the aroma, just as soon as I put these vegetables in here, is really good. Again, the vegetables that are in here, we have onions, green pepper, and celery, which is considered the holy trinity of Creole cooking. And there's also a little bit of green onions. And these are just going to simmer down here for about a half an hour before we add the rest of the ingredients in. So I'm going to just go ahead and let these go, and we'll come back maybe at some point in the process, maybe after the half an hour, to show you what they look like. I do want to mention that when we add the liquid in, you can see how the vegetables are kind of coated with the flour mixture. It's going to look like it's separating, but it's all going to come back together at the end. So if it looks funky, don't worry, because it's all going to work out, I promise. Coming back to you quickly midway between sauteing the vegetables, they're starting to soften up, and as I mentioned, they're going to kind of melt into the sauce. And I want to show you in the bottom of the pot, we have what's called a fond. It's kind of like the crusty stuff that gets on the bottom of the pot. And as we add the liquids, this is going to get scraped up into the finalized dish. I had been kind of scraping it up as we go along, but that's really not necessary. That's just because of the flour and the butter kind of cooking together. We are going to be adding more butter in at the final stage, along with the tomato sauce, the Worcester sauce, and the spices. And then the last stage that we'll also be adding that shrimp stock that we've been making, and all those what are called brown bits, or the fond on the bottom, are going to come up as soon as we add the liquid in, and it'll be worked into the sauce. Hello everybody, I'm back, and we're at the point now where the vegetables have been cooking for about a half an hour. And I'm going to be adding in the stock and the seasonings, the rest of the butter, and the Worcester sauce. So I'm going to start by adding in this other stick of butter. This is a very rich dish. I have made it with half the butter, and it's fine, but it's so good with all of the butter. So I would highly recommend using all of it. So I'm going to stir that around to get that kind of melting in there. And at the same time, I'm going to be adding in my shrimp stock. And I want to bring this over here so you can see. It's like a plain, it's actually probably more of a broth because it's very clear. But this is just from boiling or simmering the shrimp shells that I took off the peeled shrimp with a bay leaf and a little bit of peppercorns. And I'm going to put this in here. And then we've got a little bit of tomato sauce that's going to go in there as well. Coming up right now. There's our tomato sauce. And then we have our Worcester sauce. And our spices, which is basil, thyme, and a bay leaf. And I'm going to stir that all together. And this is going to be going for another hour or so. And basically the vegetables, which have already cooked down quite a bit, are really going to melt into the sauce. And I'm going to come back a couple times during the next hour while this is cooking. At some point, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to look as if the sauce has broken. It's going to look like the vegetables are coated with flour and all the butter's melted out. But it's going to be fine. Trust me, it's going to be totally fine. And at the very end, after the sauce is cooked for an hour, we're going to be adding the shrimp in after taking it off the flame because the shrimp will cook really fast. You don't want to have overcooked shrimp. So I'm going to put them in there and then I'm going to chill this down. I'm actually going to serve it tomorrow over some steamed rice. But that's where we are for now. And I hope that you're enjoying this. And once again, I really wish that you all were here in my kitchen so that you could smell this along with me because it smells absolutely amazing. So I'm back again. I just want to give you an update. We're about halfway through the cooking stage after we've added the shrimp stock in here. You can see some of the butter fat floating on top. And it has a lovely, lovely aroma. You can get the faint hint of the shrimp flavoring. The vegetables are going to continue to break down more as this continues to cook for the next half hour. So in half an hour, I'm going to come back to you and we're going to put the shrimp in. I'm going to turn the heat off at that point. The shrimp are going to cook almost immediately. So the shrimp, they look kind of translucent when they're raw, but when they start to cook, their body color fills in. It gets white and they turn pink. And it happens really fast. And in my opinion, overcooked shrimp is not a good thing. You don't want it undercooked either. That's not a good thing either. But just putting it in here in the heat and letting it kind of simmer there is going to be perfect. And then tomorrow when I fix this up again, we're just going to heat it not even to boiling, just to get it hot, and it's going to be perfect. It's going to be served over either a steamed rice or a boiled rice, which is a revelation to me. I just came across that in a different New Orleans cookbook. And I will talk more about that in a little bit. So I'm back. This is for the final touch of adding the shrimp back into the sauce to finish cooking. So I'm going to pick this up for a second and show you. Here is my container with the shrimp. As I mentioned, the shrimp, when they're raw, they're kind of translucent. As soon as I put them in the hot sauce, hot, not spicy, hot temperature, you're going to see that they seize up immediately and get solid and translucent, and the gray parts on them are going to turn pink. And I'm going to take it off the heat immediately and chill it down. This is going to be a wonderful supper for tomorrow night. So here we go. So as you can see, the shrimp are right away going from translucent to turning white. And the sauce smells divine. There's a subtle shrimp scent from the sauce because of the shrimp stock that we use. And as you can see, the vegetables have pretty much melted into the sauce, like all those chopped vegetables that we had before. The chopped onion, the chopped celery, the chopped green onions, and the chopped green pepper, they've all really melted into the sauce. I still have my bay leaf there, and I'm going to pull out a shrimp here just for a second so you can see kind of the transformation. So it's starting to set up. I've turned the temperature up a little bit on here. I had it really low so that it wouldn't be burning in the simmer. But I really do not want my shrimp to be overcooked. Shrimp are very sensitive. They, personally, I don't like shrimp that are overcooked. Shrimp that are overcooked are rubbery. And so just putting them here in the hot sauce and then bringing the hot sauce back up to temperature again is going to get them totally cooked. And then we chill it down and heat it up again tomorrow, just to a hot temperature, but not to boiling, to get everything heated through so it's tasty. And they're going to be perfectly cooked. They're going to have a beautiful texture, not rubbery, but just tasty and shrimpy. And so here's a good example. You can see I've been stirring this around in this sauce that was about 210 degrees, and it's partly cooked on the edges, but it still is like translucent in the middle. So by tomorrow, after these have had a chance to sit in the hot sauce, hot, not spicy, but hot caloric, they're going to be perfect to be reheated and served over steamed rice. So that is today's lesson on shrimp étouffé. I'm going to be putting the recipe in my newsletter this week. If you want to subscribe to the newsletter, there will be a link in my Facebook post, and I hope you enjoyed this. And I really do hope that you try this. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's a very, very tasty and satisfying recipe, and you will impress your friends if you do make this for them. Thanks, and ciao for now. Bye-bye.